everyone. Welcome to our webinar and our town hall on accessory dwelling units. I have a neighbor who's moving and my little dog seems to not be happy. So I'm going to mute and pass it over to Naomi so I can get my little dog under control. Sorry about this.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for spending a little bit of your Saturday with us. I'm Naomi Grenditz. I am an aide to Councilman Sandoval. And we also have another person from the city here. We have Andrew Webb. He is a member of the planning department, and he is the one who has been assigned to this, looking into this proposal, and he's an expert on ADUs and rezonings. So you have all three of us to answer questions. We're going to start with a bit of a presentation on what ADUs are, what this proposal is, kind of where we are in the process. And then really the rest of the time is up for Q&A. So this is meant to be a time for you to ask your questions, for us to clarify things, and to meet your neighbors. If you feel like turning your cameras on, we are streaming live on Facebook, and this is being recorded. We will be posting these recordings to both the project webpage. And yes, as the councilman just posted, there's a couple ways to engage in the conversation. So absolutely post at any point in the chat the questions you may have. As I start this presentation about what ADUs are, there may be some technical language. If for any reason I'm going too fast, something doesn't make sense, please let us know. The councilman will stop me, will ask me to explain things more. We really want this to be understandable and comprehensible for everybody. Other than clarifying questions like that, we'd like to save the discussion for the end. And again, that's going to be the bulk of the meeting today. So we will have time to have a good discussion about everything. And if you're watching us live on Facebook, feel free to put questions in the chat there. We're also monitoring that. And so we'll loop in those questions as well. I don't think that we have anybody on the phone today. But when we get to the Q&A portion, if we do see phone numbers, we can go over how to participate that way as well. So Councilman, I don't know if you want to say anything else, but I am also happy to just dive into the presentation.
Yeah, go ahead. Let's get started. Thank you.
All right. Share my screen. Great. Does that look good? All right, perfect. So this is the second of 2 town halls that we've held. The same information has been presented at both. We just wanted to give people as much opportunity as possible to attend one of these. So we've done our welcome ADU presentation. We're going to go over next steps, and then we'll do Q&A. So on to what are ADUs? So ADUs are accessory dwelling units, but they're more commonly known as granny flats, casitas, carriage houses. They're all over Denver and have been for many years, but these days they're known by the term accessory dwelling unit. And accessory dwelling unit in the Denver zoning code is a very specific structure. It's an extra smaller dwelling unit in addition to the primary house on a single unit property. And the key word here is accessory. So an accessory dwelling unit has to be sort of attached. It has to be accessory to something. So it always has to be accessory to a primary single unit home. This means that accessory dwelling units can't be built. For example, if you have a property that's a duplex, each unit, they can't build an ADU. You can't build an ADU on that property. It's really only meant to be kind of a supplement to a single unit zoned, or a single unit use main house, and then a smaller unit. And there are actually 2 forms, which I will show you in a second: detached and attached. So this is a attached or detached ADU. This is probably what people think of more when you think of ADUs. You think of the little cottage or the structure in the back separated from the main house. But in our zoning code and the way these are regulated, we actually also have an attached ADU in Denver. So this is its own separate little smaller unit, but it's considered part of the main house. So it could be like an addition in this image, or it could also be a basement conversion. It could be honestly in the attic, or it could even be another part inside the main house that has been turned into its own access, its own little living area. It qualifies as an ADU. Here is an example of an actual house in Denver that has a legal, totally permitted basement ADU. And as you can see, when people do it like this, it's really invisible from the street. And one of the rules about ADUs is they're really meant to be, again, accessory. They're meant to be less noticeable. The street, as you walk by it, you're supposed to really, all the rules around ADUs make it so that you are supposed to see a single unit house. That's the primary thing that you see and you sense walking down the street. The ADU is supposed to be supplemental and much less noticeable. So diving into a little bit more about how these are regulated. There are pages in the zoning code that I have links to at the end of this presentation that will be uploaded as a PDF to the webpage. You can go in and you can look at all the rules and regulations around them. But to summarize, there's restrictions about how tall they can be, their overall size, where they can be placed on your property, how many people can live in them, by how large they are, and a lot of other rules. They also have to be designed to be comparable in composition and appearance to the main house. So again, meant to be something you don't really notice walking down the street. Also, very importantly, an accessory dwelling unit cannot be subdivided or sold off separately. Again, that word accessory, it has to remain accessory to something. If it was sold off, it would be its own standalone, what we call a primary dwelling unit. And that would not be allowed. It would no longer be accessory. Also, in single unit zones, which is what we're looking at here in West Highland, the owner of a property that wants an ADU has to live on the property. They can live in the ADU, they can live in the main house, but they do have to live on the property. So you wouldn't get kind of an absentee landlord or having both units being rented out if someone were to build an ADU. So all of these rules really distinguish accessory dwelling units from some other types of buildings that may be a little confusing, but ADUs are not a duplex. So a duplex, it means there's two completely equal standalone units on a property. When you walk down the street, you can tell it's a 2-unit building. An ADU is not that. Accessory dwelling units are also not apartment zoning. So zoning to allow ADUs doesn't allow apartments, it doesn't allow duplexes. It's also not commercial zoning, and allowing ADUs doesn't open the way to any of these other types of development. It just allows an accessory dwelling unit on the property, which we'll get into in a little bit. So some of the reasons that we've heard from West Highland and from other communities in District 1 about why people want to build ADUs. I'll go over these super briefly. People enjoy, and this is also based off of how they're used throughout the country and research on accessory dwelling units. They can provide extra income if someone chooses to rent one out. That can help people deal with the rising costs of living in Denver. They're also generally, because they are smaller, they are naturally going to, as a rental, be a little bit less and maybe a little bit easier for someone like a young person or a young couple or family that can't afford to live in many of our larger homes here to have a place that they can afford to live. It also helps prevent displacement and is a way to add some housing without demolishing existing housing, without building apartments, and without radically changing how a neighborhood feels. A lot of people have talked to us about family strength. Many of the comments we've heard, people wanting to build ADUs to house family members, especially older family members, or as property owners themselves. As someone gets older, it's a place to age in place, meaning maybe the larger house as you get older is a bit too much. You just want a smaller, maybe single floor area to live, but on your same property. Someone can build an ADU, and when they reach that age, can move into the ADU, rent out the front to someone for income or to have family members live there. In addition, having accessory dwelling units when they're detached, which is mostly what we're talking about today, brings what we call eyes on the alley. So when there are people that are living actually on our alleys, it deters crime. It encourages people to take care of their alleys. It's just an extra benefit there. So these are some of the reasons we've heard and also seen the research of why West Highland may want to allow accessory dwelling units. So now we're going to go into zoning, where ADUs are allowed in Denver. So currently about 30% of Denver already allows ADUs. You can see on this map, anything in color, in the areas with color on them, allow ADUs. And this map is actually accessible with this link here. Again, this will be in the PDF we upload. So ADUs are allowed by default in areas that already allow 2 or more units or commercial buildings. So that's a lot of this area you'll see here. They're also allowed in certain single unit areas. And I know this map is small, but if you can see this kind of light yellow color, those are all single unit areas where accessory dwelling units are allowed. And in those cases, there's a special zoning that they have, and that there's a 1 at the end of the zone name. So for example, USUB is a single unit district that doesn't allow ADUs. USUB1 does allow ADUs. And if someone lives in a single unit area that currently doesn't allow it, they have to rezone to get that 1 at the end. So I'll do a quick primer on zoning code, what these kind of alphabet soup means. So that first letter is the largest context of a neighborhood, of an area. The U, which is what West Highlands has, means urban, and it's often applied to our sort of original neighborhoods, original inner ring suburbs. They're a single unit, but it's pretty dense, it's a nice urban area. Things start getting more specific as you go down. So it's even more important is the next set of letters. SU stands for single unit. That means that limits what type of building you can build in the zone district. In SU, that means you can build a single unit dwelling. And then the last 2 letters, or the last set of letters, actually indicates what the average property size is, lot size in the area. So a B at the end means it's an average of 4,500 square feet in properties around you. At C, it's a 5,500 square feet. And then finally, at the very end, if you have a 1, you can build an ADU. So looking at West Highland, this proposal would apply to all of these properties in color on the map. Properties that are not in color already allow ADUs, or are in a very special type of zoning called a planned unit development, which is extremely complicated to administer or to do a rezoning with. It's a whole other ballgame. So what we're looking at is the single unit zones in West Highland, A, B, and C. So those are the lot sizes. And it's about 3,200 properties, and they would all get the 1 after the zone district. And again, that would just allow people, if they wanted to, a homeowner, to build an ADU. It wouldn't change anything else about the zoning. I did want to bring up historic districts, because West Highland, I think, is our neighborhood that has the most historic districts out of any single neighborhood in District 1. They're listed here, and then there's also individual landmarked buildings that are the stars on this map. So there's roughly 562 properties that are inside historic districts. And we often get questions about, can you even build an ADU there? What's it like? The landmark department that regulates all this supports ADUs. You can build an ADU. You just have to go through design review and that whole process that any other change, like major renovation or modification to your house, you would normally have to do anyway if you are in a historic district, especially if you're a contributing building. It's that same process. So we've spoken many times with the landmark staff. They do see requests for ADUs pretty frequently in historic districts. They just, again, meet that design review process to make sure that they fit visually, aesthetically in with the historic district. So let's talk a little bit about the results of our outreach so far. So we've done 1 round of sending postcards to every property owner in those 3,200 or so properties identified. So postcards went out right at the end of 2021. And then we did an extra round of door-to-door flyering to make sure that we hit people at least twice. Sometimes you don't notice something that comes in the mail, sometimes something on the door works better. And we're happy to say responses have been really strong. We have 448 responses so far to the survey. And it's breaking down so far as just under 70% in support. We've got 24% opposed and 6% were undecided. So if you were undecided, I hope you're at this meeting today and we can answer any questions that you have. If you took the survey, you also probably noticed we asked a few more questions. We wanted to know if people were actually going to build an ADU. What we've found in many, again, 30% of the rest of the city that allows ADUs, in addition to the neighborhoods that Councilman Sandoval has rezoned, ADUs are not you get the rezoning, all of a sudden every single person has an ADU. They do come in rather slowly. So it's interesting to see what the impact would be, how many of your neighbors would actually plan to do this over the next, the short term, and then maybe even the next 10 years or so. So when we asked that, most people that were interested in building an ADU actually said they probably weren't planning to do it until 3 to 7 years, maybe over the next decade. The next majority were not planning to build ADUs at all. And this may be a combination of people who were opposed to the rezoning, but also people who supported it, they just didn't plan to build an ADU. And then 11% plan to build an ADU immediately, whatever that may mean. And I think that number, I think that number was maybe around 50 people, but let me check my notes with this view. I cannot see them right now, I'm sorry. We also asked if you did want to build an ADU, what was the primary reason you were going to build one? So again, top answer was I don't plan to build an ADU. So that was 1/3 of the respondents. And then the breakdown is really interesting. So it seems most people actually want to use this extra structure they'd be allowed to build for a guest house for visitors, maybe for family, maybe for friends. Secondly, for just extra space, as we're all stuck home during COVID, it's really nice to have sometimes an extra building out there that is comfortable and that we can use as a flexible space. And then the next most popular choice was actually to house a family member. That may be an older parent or maybe a younger child or someone right out of college who's moving back. Below that is a long-term tenant. So that means just a long-term lease rental. And then at the very bottom above or tied with other is a short-term rental. And I think we like asking this question because we know that short-term rentals they're something we hear a lot from people about. Some people are concerned that all ADUs are meant to be short-term rentals, and that's the primary reason people want to build them. So we've asked this question now in our 3 or 4 other neighborhoods we've rezoned. And the desire to use it for a short-term rental is consistently every single time at the bottom or right above other. We also mapped out where responses have come from, because we want to make sure it's not just one part of the neighborhood that's giving feedback, as well as it's not people outside of the neighborhood. So I'm happy to report that there were only 12 responses where people listed their address as actually being outside of the neighborhood. So I did take that into account when crunching the data. The responses were 6 opposed and 6 in support. So it actually didn't change the percentages at all, but only 12 people that were outside of the neighborhood. And then lastly, here is our outreach plan. So where are we now? We're again in the second of 2 virtual town halls that we're holding. We will continue to track responses. We did have a survey goal of getting 380 responses and have far exceeded that. But we're not going to shut down the survey today. We'll probably keep it open for a little while longer, as there still seems to be a lot of interest, people responding and it trickling in. So you may close the survey in mid-February or so, really when it seems like people are just not answering anymore. And at that point, if there is support, Councilman Sandoval will submit the rezoning application. this is what happens after that. So I wanted to show where we are today in this process of rezoning. Anybody that rezones anything has to go through this process. We are here at this public outreach phase that is incredibly important, and a lot of work we like to do before an application is even submitted. But just to show you, after an application is submitted, there's a 4 to 6 month, kind of more at the end of that, it's usually 6 months at least these days. There's this process that's the legislative process. So first, the planning department will review the rezoning application. There will be internal comment about it. It will then have opportunities for a public hearing at planning board. So that happens after maybe a month or so. After planning board, it moves to the Land Use Transportation Infrastructure Committee. So it's gone now to council as a bill. It's discussed there. And then after that, there's other processes that are required. During all of this, there are mandatory notifications. So homeowners, property owners will again receive notices that there's an application in. There will be signs posted around the neighborhood that the application is in, directing people for how they can give public comment at any point throughout this or at public hearings. So the planning board is the first public hearing, and it culminates finally with, with the full city council public hearing at the very end of the process. And that is when the rezoning is either approved or denied officially. So I have some resources here at the end. Again, this will be posted on the project webpage. There's a link to the survey. Please share it. There's also my direct phone number on all the materials that have been sent out and on the webpage. I've received many calls from people who are not comfortable with using the internet or don't have access to it, and they've completed the survey with me over the phone, and I've logged it in our system. You can also email me directly. And there's also a couple of other interesting things going on in the city right now. There is a project that will happen, unfold over this year, to look at some of the standards around accessory dwelling units, evaluate if they're working. Are they getting the types of structures that are good? I mean, do they fit in well with the neighborhoods? Is it working as well in a suburban neighborhood as in a different neighborhood? Please sign up for their updates. It's going to be a really interesting project, and there will be public input throughout that. I also have a link to the zoning code and a link to a focused presentation we did last summer that's just all about ADUs, really diving into their regulations and standards, some of the obstacles people face when trying to build them. It's really interesting and it's very technical. So with that, I will stop talking and I will stop sharing my screen so we can all see each other. And we can just start with Q&A. Let's see if there's any questions in the chat. Not so far. So since we're a smaller group, feel free to just raise your hand and go ahead and ask a question. We've got Andrew, we've got Councilman Sandoval and myself, and we can just have a conversation about this.
And if those who don't know how to raise your hand, you go to the reactions, and then there's the raise the hand function if you have any questions. Adam, go ahead. You can unmute if you're able to.
Okay, sorry about that. Can you all hear me? This is Adam.
Yep.
Yeah, no problem. After 2 years of Zoom, we all still figuring it out.
I've got to apologize. I'm in a gondola right now skiing. It wasn't the most convenient time to join, but it's an important issue to me as a, I won't say long time, but a Highland resident for the last 15 years and kind of the 29th and Perry area. And the first question I had is the map's not really clear as to whether the ADU section would include up to 29th. It shows a 31st Street and then a block down. I'm assuming it does, just looking at the shapes of some of the structures. So if there's an ability to clarify that, that would be helpful. My bigger comment is with regards to my being a fan of ADUs, given that they're allowed everywhere else around us in Berkeley and elsewhere. The concern being is with regards to parking. And my suggestion would be if you're going to build an ADU to have a dedicated parking space or spaces required. so that you're not drawing more traffic, especially with notwithstanding your research suggesting these aren't going to primarily be used for STRs. My thinking that they actually will. To justify the cost of building an ADU, you have to generate a certain amount of income to not take on a loss. And doing so requires, in many situations, renting it short term, which is going to draw additional traffic. Even if you've got additional long-term tenants, they're going to potentially have cars. And so I'd like to propose some consideration of parking being a requirement of having an ADU added to your property. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Adam. Thank you for joining us from a gondola. That's great. So I can answer, so the first question, the clarification. In the map that we showed of where this would apply to, the areas that were not in color, so right around 32nd and also 38th, those are excluded because they already allow ADUs. So they either have, some people have done one-off rezonings. So that means that they have individually gone and asked the city for a rezoning and gone through a process that it actually costs $1,000 every single time an individual property owner wants to do it. And so that is one of the big reasons that Councilman Sandoval wants to offer to sponsor this rezoning for the community, instead of hundreds or so of individual homeowners having to go through a process one at a time, paying $1,000. It's possible for her to legislatively sponsor this and just allow anyone who wants to build an ADU. Again, it's not going to be everybody, but to be able to not have to go through at least that step to get the rezoning. So again, the areas that are not in color on the map would already allow ADUs. As to parking, thank you for that suggestion. It comes up a lot. It's definitely something that we hear from people. I will be on that ADUs in Denver project I talked about, where the city is going to be relooking at some of the standards around them. I'm going to be sitting on that as a steering committee member. And so I'm always going to be hearing from what our constituents are saying and passing that on. And if you yourself want to sign up for engaging in the process, bring that up. That's definitely an avenue to have these kind of discussions about parking. And Andrew or Councilman Sandoval, I don't know if you want to add anything about the parking issue.
Thanks, Adam. I put the boundaries of West Highland in the chat if you want to look at that. And then I also put the bit.ly for West Highland, so you could open up if you want to cut and paste that onto your phone, so you have that presentation when you get home and that link in your browser.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, so and I did direct message and then I put it in the chat for everybody else who's attending. We do hear parking issues a lot with accessory dwelling units, and I just want to make sure that people on this call know the first neighborhood that we rezoned, my office took on rezoning the entire neighborhood, was the Chaffee Park neighborhood that passed in 2000 and 2020, sorry. And to date, not one accessory dwelling unit has been built. So it's been 2 years since that zoning passed and not one permit has been built. In other neighborhoods such as Sloan's Lake, I think 2 have been built since last year, since I did the rezoning. So it's not a huge influx of redevelopment, or what I call gentle density, because what I've heard from growing up in Northwest Denver and the north side is when the zoning code changed in 2010, we experienced a lot of change, especially West Highland experienced a lot of change. I would say my neighborhood, I live in the Berkeley neighborhood, Tennyson experienced drastic change. Jefferson Park is totally different built environment. And so my goal in being your representative is bringing a different type of housing stock that doesn't change the character of our neighborhood. I am really intent on changing and preserving the character of Northwest Denver with overlays and other tools that if you have questions about, you can reach out to my office. But this is just a type of gentle density, and parking is an issue. So I do understand that, and we will make sure that Naomi, I'm sitting on the equity in rezoning task force, which looks at the 5 criteria that we use to rezone on Monday nights for our whole process. So I'm on that task force. I wanted to be on both, but I was told no. And so the compromise was that I would be on the equity and rezoning as a council person representing Denver. And then my staff, Naomi, could be a subject matter expert on the accessory dwelling units. And it was a great compromise that we had with the community development department. So I know that was a long-winded answer, but just so you all know.
Mhm.
Are there any other questions?
Just want to for
Ooh.
just for the work generally and continue that parking issue. Some homes in the area that are older, and you've already got 2 cars out on the street. So thanks again. Appreciate all your work.
Well, I think we might have missed a little bit of that, but to maybe just one last thought on the parking, since it is something that probably everyone has on their mind right now. It's interesting, in terms of zoning rules, and Andrew can probably speak to this a little bit too. Even for the way it exists now, even if you build a brand new single unit home, you're actually not required to build parking. Those requirements kick in when you build a multi-unit home. But it's interesting because, pretty much every new home that you see has a garage. And when it comes to ADUs, they're not required to provide parking. Every single one that I've seen, I'd say not every single, almost all of them have had some combination of garage and ADU on top. It's interesting. Again, you don't have to build that. So I'm not trying to say like everyone's going to build a garage to their ADU, but it is interesting that is how it's playing out. Homeowner, again, because it's a homeowner that has to decide to do this, to build an ADU. They usually want to keep their own garage space because we like garages. And then often I've seen almost a 3-car garage with a space that is left for the ADU unit. There's also some weird like zoning rules that sort of incentivize that. If you have a bit of a larger space and parking on the bottom with the ADU on top, you can actually kind of discount some of the parking garage area from what's called the lot coverage maximum. So literally how much of your property you can put building on. So there's a little bit of an incentive almost to provide parking. And again, from what we've seen and the neighbors we've talked to that have built ADUs, they generally do put garages. So just wanted to throw that out there. Michael?
Thank you. How close to a property line would they be allowed to put one of these structures?
Andrew, do you want to take that?
Let me just pull up my zoning code here real quick. I had that page ready to go and then I moved away from it. So side interior setbacks, which is the distance between a structure outer wall and the interior lot line, say a lot line between 2 properties, is 3 feet in the urban neighborhood context, which is what all of the properties in that area currently have.
Okay, thank you for that. Go ahead.
So effectively what that would mean is there would be 3 feet between a neighbor's structures and the property line that you share, and then an additional 3 feet between structures on your property and that property line. So for a total of 6 feet of separation.
Is that, Andrew, is that for the narrower lots or is that for, I thought it was 5 feet.
Side interior for the USU districts is 3 feet. Let's see. Nope. Thank you for that. Thank you for clarifying that. It is for those lots which are up to 40 feet wide, and then if they are wider than 40 feet, it is 5 feet. Thank you for highlighting that.
Yeah, no worries. And that's the same. Requires setbacks as a garage, I believe. Yep. In general. Actually, with the garage in some certain scenarios, I think you can build it right up to the property line.
Really? You can
Yes.
put a garage on the property line?
You can,
There are,
you can
there
build
are
a-
some, yes, there are some scenarios in which you can build a detached accessory structure like a garage against a property line. And if it already exists, it can also be made conforming.
Okay, well, thank you. I have another question, but I want to go ahead and see if anybody else has another question first.
oh, thank you. Does anybody else want to jump in? I think you go ahead. Oh, Kenny?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, thank you for your time. You mentioned for larger lot sizes, you could build, the roadblock I'm hitting is when you build the ADU on the garage, you are limited to one building form standard. So if I put the ADU, then I can only build the garage the size of the ADU. And being a double, this is my property being double lot on the corner, I've got plenty of room. And is there a way to get rid of the building form standard of only allowing the ADU building form on top of the garage, I guess is my question.
There's not currently a way to remove that requirement. However, that is one of the, I think Naomi mentioned, and Councilwoman Sandoval also mentioned the ongoing ADUs in Denver project, which is looking at the citywide zoning regulations, such as things like appropriate side setbacks and building forms and minimum lot sizes for the detached ADU building form. All of those are under consideration as part of that project, which would be a text amendment to the whole zoning code applicable to any property where ADUs are permitted. And so I dropped a link to that project in the chat, and that would be a place to get involved to advocate for addressing that particular standard. And certainly, if that team hears that there have been a lot of cases where otherwise a appropriate ADU for a lot of a particular size would have been possible other than that standard, that may be something they look at changing as part of that project.
Okay, and I asked, so I'm located on the corner of 37th and Julian, a block away. Two large apartment complexes have just been built. And as Adam mentioned with the parking, I ultimately just want an extra 138 square feet for the garage to provide that parking spot for the ADU as, I guess, just a common courtesy gesture to the neighborhood. I know it's not written in any of the code or whatnot, but parking is getting out of control with these apartment complexes flooding into the neighborhood. And so if any consideration can be taken into the building form standard of allowing some extra square footage in a garage, I would be grateful for that.
Certainly, and I'll pass that on to that project team, and I would recommend going to that website and reaching out to them directly as well, and making sure that that is an issue that's already on their radar.
Yes, sir. Thank you for your time.
Great. Anybody, Michael, would you like to continue with your questions? You're muted currently. You're muted.
Thank you for pointing that out. Do you hear me now?
Yes.
So in building, let's say 3 feet from a property line, I know that construction is not supposed to alter the drainage. So I had a foundation engineer at my house a while back. He said, don't water within 6 to 8 feet of the foundation. You got another structure 6 feet away, let's say their gutters overflow, you've got a water situation. Let's say just the construction itself creates a difference in the way the water is draining. Does the city go around and check to make sure that new structures are not altering the drainage that previously existed?
I can.
Please take
pick
that one, Andrew.
Yeah, I can at least start on an answer for that, and that may take some additional outreach to our building, to our development services department. But typically, you would have to show, for new construction, you would have to show your drainage plan and where gutters would land, essentially that sort of thing, on a site plan that has to be approved. And then after you build a project, it is there, inspection, there is an inspection after a project is complete to make sure that it was completed in a way that matches the site plan. However, if, down the road there it is, there's a rainstorm or something like that, and it appears that the drainage isn't working the way it was supposed to, there isn't a system by which the city can know that unless somebody actually calls it in via 311. But that would be a very typical type of enforcement situation begun via a 311 call or using the Pocket Gov app to bring the attention to our enforcement team, which would our neighborhood zoning and enforcement, which would go out and take a look, and if there was a problem, would then work with that property owner to fix the problem.
And what is 311?
311 is like it's a number you can just dial on a phone pad. It's like 911, except instead of the emergency dispatchers, it goes to a team of people who and most cities use 311 systems now, a team of staff who can solve problems for residents, whether it's loose dogs or a zoning violation like overheight weeds or something like that. Abandoned vehicles, all kinds of potholes are reported via 311. It's basically the way, because cities could never know all of the issues that are happening unless somebody reports them. So they depend on people using either that phone number, just dialing 311, or using the Pocket Gov app, which is like a phone application, to report problems that they see around the city, and then the city prioritizes and goes and fixes those.
So with that, do you actually talk to someone or just leave a message and then nobody ever gets back to you?
No, there's an operator actually, that there's a team of operators that take your call and explain where they're sending your issue. If it's a fire safety issue, it goes to one department. If it's a zoning issue, it goes to our neighborhood inspection services team, so on and so forth.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and say, because we're here, I understand you have this survey and these results, but just for the record, I am concerned about the noise. We had somebody build one of these things over there. If we change the zoning in Berkeley, for instance, and only 2 people build these structures, why are we changing the zoning for the entire neighborhood if hardly anybody is building them? I don't understand that. The grinding, the saws grinding are just with, it's not these additional structures, but with these tearing down the building, some bulldozer backed into our car and dented it. These sorts of things are quite irritating. And so for the record, I am against this proposal.
Thanks, Michael. So the reason why I'm proposing this is it's $1,000 fee to go through the process. And West Highland has the most accessory dwelling units one-off, meaning owner applications going through the process. And as it's been mentioned, it is a lengthy process and a costly process. And so I would prefer that my constituents spend $1,000 towards an architect, $1,000 towards seeing the feasibility of being able to build one. And so if I can save money by doing this, instead of having people have to pay somebody to go through the process and having to pay the 9 months, which is you can't get back time, that's what I'd prefer. And so that's why I'm going through the process of making sure that we mail out to everybody in the mail, all property owners within this area, and then also follow back up with a survey. And I know not everyone will agree with this process, But I do believe that according to our adopted plans, it is a way to create a different type of housing stock than we currently have. It was once allowed many moons ago, and now we've reintroduced it. So, but thank you for your feedback. I really do appreciate it. Kenny, do you still have a question, or did you just forget to raise your hand?
Yes, ma'am. I have one more question, and then I should be done. And thank you for what you're doing, because time and money, it is costly. You may know I've gone through the process, got denied, whatever the case is. But my question is, if I attach the garage ADU, that building, to my home with a walkway, then does the building size not matter on the garage and ADU if it's attached to my home because it's this building form standard, if that makes sense?
Kenny, I am not sure I fully understand that. You're saying if the ADU is built as an attached ADU as a part of your primary house structure, is that what you're
Yes,
asking?
sir. Yes, sir. I would attach it. I envision a nice walkway to the garage, and it would be attached to that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so in that case, yes, there would not be the same footprint limitation on an attached ADU as there is on a detached ADU, but the impact to total lot coverage would be affected by adding to your existing primary house structure.
Okay, that's wonderful news. I appreciate that.
Owen Brown.
Join the meeting.
Wonderful. Does anyone have any other questions? And so I see someone is just joined via phone. So if you would like to raise your hand to ask a question, I believe it is *9 to raise your hand, and *6 to mute and unmute. So to our individual who is calling in on the phone, if you have a question for the group, feel free to press *9 and then we know you have a question. Right now we'll go to Stephanie.
Hi, I'm going to make an attempt. I've got 4 little ones at home, so sorry if I get interrupted. Can you hear me okay?
Yes,
we can.
Okay, good. So I totally support this. We're in the West Highland neighborhood. We're thinking about redoing our garage. We'd love to have an ADU out there, mostly just for extra area for us, for our guests, for our grandparents when they come visit. So along the lines of the survey, I think. But question for you in terms of logistics, because we would be probably the ones that would build in 3 to 8 years, or probably on 3 years side, if we can get the money to. But do you require for utilities like separate water taps, sewer taps, that kind of thing, or can it all be the same as your main structure? The same line, do you know?
Andrew, can you take this one?
Yeah, so it kind of depends on what you plan to do with it, but typically if you are building a separate dwelling unit on your property, you would be required to have a separate tap so that the water used by that second dwelling unit can be metered and billed separately.
Okay, so we would have to get separate taps then for a garage type of situation.
And like an ADU that's on top of a garage?
That's correct. Yeah, that'd be our goal.
If it's going to be a separate dwelling unit, yes. So under the current code, you could just simply build a detached bedroom on top of your garage, for example, and that would be fine. And that could be attached to the same taps as your existing structure. But if you're building a separate dwelling unit, it does have to have its own separately metered water tap, and I think other utilities have to be separate as well. That would all be reviewed by and confirmed by development services when you came in to get your building and zoning permits for that project.
Okay, so probably too detailed for this conversation today, but trying to just figure out what constitutes it as a separate dwelling unit versus just an ADU.
Well, an ADU is a separate dwelling unit in that it is a, you know, it has its own kitchen, and a kitchen is essentially what distinguishes
so
a
the
separate
kitchen.
dwelling unit. Yep.
And bathrooms and stuff, is that all part of it too?
Yep, that does not actually separate it as a separate dwelling unit. You can have, you know, you could, for example, you could have like just a detached bathroom on your property if you wanted to. I don't think I've ever heard of anybody asking to do that, but a detached bedroom over a garage is something that people do, and having a bathroom in there is something that's possible, and you would not have to have, that would not require special zoning. That would be part of your, essentially your primary dwelling unit, and would be allowed. But yeah, as soon as you add a kitchen, you've basically are creating a separate dwelling unit, and you have to have a permit for that second kitchen either way. So that would be at that time, it's my understanding is that you would be required then to show how you are providing separate utility connections.
Okay, perfect. That answers my question. And I guess just one other question is, are there separate standards? Would we be looking at like accessory structure standards to know what to build to?
Yeah, so in the zoning code, your zoning is in the U or urban context. So currently it's USU, some letter signifying your zone lot size. And then if this area is rezoned, it would retain that same single unit zoning, USU, and then a letter signifying your parcel size and the addition of a 1, which are the zone districts that allow ADUs. And you can find the regulations for those in Article 5 of the Denver Zoning Code, and I'll drop a link to the code in the chat. And then in Article 5, you could find the standards specifically for the accessory dwelling unit structure under detached accessory structures. And it has all the setbacks and heights and all the other requirements there.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, appreciate having this meeting, and we'll be following the process. And thanks for going through this for us so we don't have to.
Sure.
Thank you for joining us, Stephanie. I appreciate it. And have a happy Saturday with your family.
You too. Thank you.
All right. Oh, Mark had a clarifying question in the chat. Can you talk about what constitutes a kitchen? And I could take this one too.
Go ahead. I'm curious. Hopefully we understand it the same way. Yeah.
Yes. So there's it's interesting because you're allowed to have a partial kitchen. So there's kind of 2 designations of kitchen in the zoning code. And a partial kitchen, like a wet bar or something like that, every home can have an extra one of those, no problem whatsoever. But if you want to have a kitchen that has a stove, so either a gas line or a high volt line with a stove in it, that is sort of the dividing appliance, so to say, of what constitutes a full kitchen. So actually, you need a permit to have an extra full kitchen, even just regularly in your normal home. And you can get one, but I think the point of that, the reasoning behind it is if you have an extra kitchen, it starts to blur the line between, well, is a part of this house another unit, another dwelling unit? Is it not? Because all of a sudden you do have a stove, you actually have like the amenities to, for living, they call it. So for your ADU, it's interesting because when you're like determining, you could have a wet bar, but if all of a sudden you have a whole other structure that also has a bedroom or something that'd be considered a bedroom, and it has a bathroom, and it has even a wet bar, for instance, doesn't have a stove in there, all of a sudden that starts to be like, this is a standalone thing, like this really could be its own unit. So for instance, if someone doesn't have the zoning that allows that, and for example, someone decides to sort of build out their garage into the second space, I've seen people get in trouble because all of a sudden that really starts to become its own standalone unit. It starts to actually become an accessory dwelling unit. And for example, it wasn't permitted or it wasn't allowed by zoning. So there's weird sort of levels of regulation there. But specifically to your question, Mark, a full kitchen has a stove. So sorry if I confuse people more with that, but.
Well said.
Thanks. Any other questions, comments, points?
Michael, go ahead. You have
are
to
muted.
unmute because if not, it's like a seance. You're here with us, but we can't hear you.
One,
Hey, I was wondering if I could ask. Oh,
go ahead.
all right. I just had two quick questions and maybe a comment. So I guess my
Since
first
you're
question is,
calling
what's the
from the
next
phone,
step?
can you give us your name?
Yes, this is Owen Brown. I live on 33rd, West 33rd.
Awesome. Thank you, Owen.
So my first question is, I guess, what's the next step in this process? I mean, where does it go from here? And then, what's the timeline?
So if you want, Owen, since you're on the phone, you can email district1@denvergov.org and we can send you the slide presentation. But the next process is we're going to continue to get as much feedback because the survey hasn't even been open for over a month. I want to make sure that the survey is open for a couple months, and then we will, if you can take the survey, we email everyone who's participated in the survey, and then we'll go back to the West Highland Neighborhood Association, WINA, who we've been working closely with on this project to determine the outcome, share the information with them. We've been talking to them for the past year about this process, and then talk to them about the survey results we've received. And if there is, I usually like to say 70% in favor for moving forward with the project. If there's 70% support on the survey, then Naomi and I would work on an application, and then it goes through the legislative process, which is about 4 to 6 months. And then it goes through the city council process where it goes to planning board. And then after planning board, it goes to the land use, transportation and infrastructure committee to be voted on to full council. And then at city council, there's a final public hearing, and that's the legislative process. And that's what takes a little more time in the process, is actually getting it through the legislative process. So I hope that helps answer your question. Okay, Michael, go ahead with yours.
Yeah, thank you. And I am turned on now. This is an even more technical question for Andrew that he made me think of. This actually does apply to me, my neighbor's garage, the eave does go to the property line. If they decided to turn that into an ADU, would they be able to build up from that garage into an ADU then on the property line?
A great question. In most cases, a garage can't be added to because they don't meet the foundation requirements that we have here. Typical garage is built on a slab, and a dwelling unit has to be built on a more conventional house style foundation. So it's rare that you can actually successfully convert an existing garage or build on top of an existing garage to do an ADU. So they would have to rebuild the structure, and it would have to meet the ADU setback requirements. And I think it maybe have been when we were talking with you about how you can build a garage on the lot line. So hopefully you saw I responded in the chat with a little bit more detail about where you can actually build a garage up to the lot line. It's essentially when the garage is in the rear 35% of the property. But an ADU cannot be built against the lot line in any circumstance.
Okay, I did not see that. Thank you for pointing that out in the chat, and thank you for your answer.
Yep.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Andrew. If there's not any more questions, I want to be respectful of everybody's Saturday. I really appreciate you joining us on your weekend and taking time out for this important discussion. I think it's really important to talk about the character of the neighborhoods that we all love and providing a different type of housing stock. Denver's gotten so unattainable for those of us who've been grown up here. So this conversation is really timely and really important for me as your representative. I'll just ask if there's any last minute questions. If not, as always, you can contact my office 720-337-7701, or you can email district1@denvergov.org and we'll get back to you. And if not, if there's no more questions, we'll end this town hall. And once again, thank you all. I always like to end with one action item. I would ask that 5 of you, as you're out walking your dog or shoveling your snow, thank God we have snow, our trees and our landscape need this moisture. Can you please tell 5 of your neighbors about this project? And if you disagree with it, I'm okay with that. We don't all have to agree. If you agree with it, that's fine. I just want 5 of you to see, please ask your neighbors. I believe that that's how grassroots initiatives get started. And I would just ask that that's our call to action. And other than that, thank you for allowing me the opportunity and privilege of serving you as your representative. Have a good Saturday. Thank you, Naomi, and thank you, Andrew, for joining us on a Saturday. I really appreciate it.
Thanks to everybody. Enjoy your weekend.